Hello, welcome to the News Hour. We begin in Israel, where doctors and medical workers have gone on strike to protest against government changes to the judicial system. The doctors were authorised by Israel's labour court to walk off the job for only 2 hours at a time. Israel's largest union, which represents more than 800,000 workers, is discussing a nationwide general strike. The industrial action follows legislation passed by Parliament on Monday, which limits the authority of Supreme Court judges to strike down government decisions. Now, violent protests broke out on the streets in a number of cities. Horse-mounted police tried to break up protests in Tel Aviv, and a settler from the occupied West Bank rammed into protesters on a freeway in the southern Sharon region. The driver injured a number of people as his car caught fire. Protesters are angry because they say the bill will damage Israel's democracy. Let's cross over to Bernard Smith, our correspondent, who's in the capital, Tel Aviv, standing by. Bernard, this is sort of the day after the vote. Protesters really failed to stop the bill. Will they continue? Is there anything really worth protesting about anymore?
So, yes, calm on Israel's streets, but the anger of those opposed to the judicial reforms is still very much there, still very fresh. And many people who've been taking part in the protests over the last 6 months, yes, it hasn't got them anywhere because Netanyahu has launched the process past the first one of these judicial reform bills. But people who've been on the process will say, well, look, we delayed it for 6 months and we managed to galvanise very disparate parts of society around one issue. We should still keep the pressure on. There will be appeals against this legislation, appeals to the very court whose powers are being curtailed by this new law. But there is a particular concern about military readiness and a concern from the Israel's Institute for National Security Studies warning that the government's judicial reforms could lead to the complete collapse of the reserve system. There's particular worry about pilots, reserve pilots, voluntary reserve pilots, who have to keep up training to be ready to fly at a moment's notice. They've said if this law goes through, and it has, they will not be available for duty. So while the government will never, of course, admit that the military is not ready publicly, there are concerns, it's understood there are concerns that the military's readiness to react quickly could be affected by the progression of this bill and by the determination of this government to push it through.
The right-wing side of the cabinet will certainly be buoyant at this result. I mean, they will want to push forward perhaps more policies through and really put the pressure on Netanyahu, and really the buck stops with him, doesn't it, as the Prime Minister, to agree to all of this?
Well, if you already want an indication of the sort of corner that Netanyahu has painted himself into and this hostage to fortune that he's become with the far-right coalition partners, the ultra-Orthodox party now wants to put forward a bill that will make it law that those who study the Torah, these are Haredi ultra-Orthodox men, instead of doing military service, that will be considered equivalent to military service. Now, they already don't do military service, but if you are in the military, you get all sorts of tax breaks and benefits, grants for education, this sort of thing. It's as a big frustration amongst the majority of Israeli population. The ultra-Orthodox don't do military service already, but they want to push this bill through again. The Supreme Court previously has stopped this bill, but because the Supreme Court's powers are being curtailed, it may not be as easy next time. Now, Netanyahu's Likud party says this is never going to become law, but it's an indication of the sort of bills that are on the agenda of the far-right parties in this government.
Bernard Smith there for us in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Well, on an official visit to Qatar, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly told Al Jazeera Israel needs to protect the independence of its judiciary.
We have a very close relationship with Israel, and that strength of relationship means that we can speak directly and frankly with the government of Israel. What, of course, we feel is that constitutional decisions should be for the country to make, but we want to make sure that Israel protects the independence of its judiciary. I think that is a very important element and something which Israel has historically been very proud of. We want to ensure that there is as wide a coalition of support for any changes as possible, and so the government should take action that brings people together rather than potentially creates division. And of course, in any system, any institution, you need checks and balances. And so these are the things that we would say to our interlocutors in the Israel government, and we join with other countries around the world, wishing Israel success and peace and prosperity, but also making sure that they have a robust and independent judiciary.